Greetings fellow ukuleleans, Jeff Weinberger coming at you here with a new tutorial. Today I'd like to talk a little bit more about fingerstyle ukulele and a very specific fingerstyle technique that is based on an interval called the tenth. So let's define our terms and get that out of the way. What is a tenth? Well, if you're at all familiar with music theory, you probably know that the distance from one note to the next is called an interval. And there are various sized intervals. Of course, a note that is real close to another note is going to have a small interval between it and the next note. And naturally, this is kind of common sense, but a note that is far away from another note is going to have a larger interval. And so an interval you might be familiar with already without knowing much about music theory is an octave. And that's 12 half steps. That is on the ukulele, 12 frets, like from your open A string, for instance, all the way up to the 12th fret of your A string. Both of those notes are called A, but one is lower and one is higher, and they're 12 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 half steps apart. And a half step is the smallest unit of interval of music that we have in Western music. In other systems of music, Eastern music like Indian music, possibly Korean music, etc., you're going to hear some other types of intervals, smaller intervals like quarter steps. But in our system, in the Western system that's based on European music, half step is the smallest. And so when you're looking at the interval of the tenth, we're measuring 10 notes apart basically. When I play this two-note interval, that is considered a tenth. And so let's look at that. It's A and it's C. And if I were to use my fingers to count up from A to C, A, B, C, that's a third, that's 3 notes away. D, E, F, G, A, ooh, there it is, okay. So A is an octave, B, C. C is a tenth. So a tenth is really 2 notes above the octave, or 1/3 above the octave, a third being an interval that has 3 letter names. A, B, C, that's a third. There's major thirds, there's minor thirds. Minor thirds are smaller, major thirds are bigger, but really all a tenth is an octave plus a third. So if that's really confusing to you, don't worry. You don't have to necessarily think too much about that music theory aspect of it and intervals. You can think simply as something that sounds nice when you play it, and you don't have to worry about the math behind it. But tenths are used all the time in music. Bach used them all the time. Paul McCartney used them when he wrote the song Blackbird on the guitar with the Beatles. That's a beautiful song that uses tenths, and you hear them all the time. Red Hot Chili Peppers use them, and they've actually been sort of popular in pop music lately. So a tenth is from A to C, but C an octave higher than this. Not that C, but this C. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. 10 notes, 10 steps. Alright, so the thing that I was playing in the intro was strictly tenths. Sometimes I played this shape, but sometimes I played this shape. And so that's a major tenth, which is a bigger space. You can see my fingers have a fret between them. It's further apart, whereas this is a minor tenth. My fingers are only on 2 consecutive frets. There's no fret in between them. So minor tenths, major tenths. And these are used a lot in classical music. Of course, I mentioned Bach, but Tarrega, the great Spanish classical guitar composer of the Romantic era, Francisco Tarrega. Or I guess in Spanish you really put an accent over the A, so Tarrega would be the way, if I actually knew how to speak Spanish well, I would pronounce it Tarrega. But I'm still learning Spanish, so Tarrega is how I say it. So if you saw that, I was playing the 2nd fret on my A string and the 3rd fret on my, the 2nd fret on my G string. It is the note A. I mistook that for the A string. And then the 3rd fret on the A string. So put those together, and that's a minor tenth. It's a beautiful interval. If you pluck that with maybe your thumb and your 2nd finger, your middle finger of your right hand, and then strike the open E string after that, you get a really cool little lick. kind of like a piano. That would be something you hear pianists do all the time. Then I take that up, take it up to a major 10th. So here are the frets that I used in that introductory thing. It was 2nd and 3rd frets, 4th and 5th, 5th and 7th. Sometimes I snuck back here to the 1st and 2nd, and other times I went further than the 5th and 7th up to the 7th and 8th, and the 9th and 10th. That's as high as I went. So I had this set. And then I kind of had this set. So it's kind of two distinct sets. And one's very minor sounding, like A minor. And one's kind of major sounding, like C major. So it's kind of interesting when you do different combinations of them. They imply different chords. They aren't actually chords, because to have a chord you have to have 3 or more notes. A basic triad is a 3-note chord. But they imply chords because they have 2 of the notes of the chord. These 2 notes, A and C, are pretty much an A minor chord minus the E note. But if you pluck your open E string, there you go. There's a 3-note triad. That's an official A minor chord right there. So these intervals kind of outline chords and imply chords, but they aren't actually chords themselves. They're just intervals. And so chords obviously contain more than one interval. A triad would contain 2 intervals, and a 7th chord would contain 3 intervals. A 9th chord would contain 4 intervals, etc. So we'll talk about that later, about chord construction. But just know that when you play an interval like that, like a 10th, 2 notes together, that far apart, it's not really a chord, but it so closely resembles a chord that we almost hear them as chords, moving chords. All right, so that's a little introduction to tenths and how they can be used on the ukulele. We can learn all kinds of songs with them. What I'm going to do is leave a link down below to a absolutely free sheet of tablature that's going to show you how to play what I just played in the intro there, and give you little chord diagrams and everything, and tablature. And then for my patrons, I'm going to leave an extra link on Patreon to go even further into this. You'll get some bonus material, so you'll get to really play around with these intervals of a tenth. Alright, so be sure to subscribe, be sure to like, be sure to click the notify bell to be notified every time I come out with a new tutorial. And I hope you enjoyed this. I'll do a lot more on this subject in the future, but I just wanted to dip our big toes into the pool of intervals and tenths. Alright, ukulele people, you take care. Bye-bye.